Okay, so last week we ended Perek Chaf, the 20th chapter, which was the Alter Rebbe in these two chapters, Chaf and Chaf Aleph 20 and 21, is really addressing the concept of what we call Achdus Hashem, the oneness of Hashem, how everything really is part of Hashem's reality. And he explained it in a particular way, and the concept that he explained was basically that the way he approached it in the previous parak is that the world is so insignificant because why? Because the world is created by the Devar Hashem, the words of Hashem, and he brought that's the spark of life that is in everything, is the words of Hashem, whatever that means. In other words, obviously not physical words, but the concept of words, the concept of tzimtzum, the tailor-made, the diluted, the diminished, so to speak, chayas, that is relatable to a physical world. But just like by a person, right? The crux of it was, just like by a person, one speech is considered nothing compared to the infinite potential of speaking. That's even within speech itself. And then speech compared to thought is much higher, will be considered insignificant, and how much more so in comparison to the emotions of a person, the seichel of a person, that is the actual person himself. So that one little speech is actually nothing, and therefore kula kamei kol chashiv, the more before Hashem something is, the less it's considered. So really it's like nothing. So therefore the world has no real significance. The only significance is that it's created by Hashem, and it belongs to, it's an expression of Hashem's speech. And that's why also we say in davening that Hashem wasn't affected by the creation of the world, because it's like, and we used, like we ended off last week, we used the term Yochid, that Hashem is alone. What it means alone, He created a world, so it's not really alone, right? Right, we said Yochid is even higher than Echad. Echad means one, but there could be two. Yochid means singular, it's completely the only existence. So we gave the mashal, for example, if someone's in a room and is alone, and a little ant comes in, there's nothing. It's like right. So what are you going to say? It's not alone because there's an ant down the room, right? You'd never do that. So therefore, the same thing is with the world. Correctly, you asked the question. So why are people so into themselves? And that's a good question. I think that's the question, right? That's what you asked at the end of the shir last week. So why are we all into ourselves? And then says that's exactly the point. Tanya tries to teach us not to be into ourselves so much, right? Because really we are a very little dot in the whole thing, and really insignificant, and therefore it's part of a much bigger picture, and therefore we should focus on the bigger picture rather than on the real reality, which is the infinity of Hashem, rather than focus on our own egocentricity, which is essentially the feeling that we are independent, right? That we are something, and that's a big mistake, and that's exactly right. And that's why today's world, when the more God gets left out of the picture, the more egocentric people become. But it's not just about God, it's about really what it means to be believing in God and connected to God. And that's what he's explaining here, that really it's not just about one God, but it's one reality, really. Okay. That was until now. Perek Chaf Aleph is going to take it even deeper. Okay? Even deeper. So, the word that we use in Chassidus for this whole concept is called Bitul Ha'olamis. The worlds are really bottled. They're like nullified. They're like nothing compared to Hashem. So far, we've explained the tremendous, how the world cannot really be considered anything independent or anything significant, using this analogy that it's just created. The whole source of the world is this one speech, so to speak. The 10 utterances from Hashem, and those 10 utterances in relation to Hashem himself are really nothing, right? So that's the concept. Okay. Now it takes it more, it takes it deeper. This is a deep idea, and we have to take it slowly. Perek Chaf Aleph, chapter 21. BINA. Midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The I don't know how they translate the word midah. How do they translate it there? The midah of Hashem.
The nature.
The nature, I guess. The nature of Hashem, so to speak. Who's shaloi kemidas basar v'dam. It's not like a human being. Now, what's he trying to say? He's saying like this. There's a general principle, by the way. Whenever whenever the Torah uses human language for Hashem, right? So that's a general thing. Let's just go slowly with this. So in the Torah we learn that the hand of Hashem, the eyes of Hashem, the mouth of Hashem, the speech of Hashem, the hearing of Hashem, right? So that's all not physical, because one of the 13 principles of our Munah, of our faith, is that Hashem doesn't have a physical form, right? Okay, so what does that mean there? So, the normal expression in Chazal is that Hashem needed to speak to us, so Dibra Torah Keloshen B'nei Adam. So the Torah spoke in the language of man. The Torah uses human language, but of course not a human language. Okay. Having said that, however, we know that there still must be a reason why in one place it says the mouth, in one place it says the eyes, one place says a right hand, a left hand, a strong hand, a weak hand. So it must mean something, right? So Chassidus takes it a lot deeper, based on Kabbalistic teachings. And that is, actually, it's the other way around. The reason that Hashem, when we say the hand of Hashem, for example, right? The hand of Hashem obviously doesn't mean the physical hand. The hand of Hashem means that we need to look at our hand. What does a hand do? So, for example, a hand gives, right? Yeah? That's one of the things a hand can do. A hand gives, right? So too, or a hand can be strong, right? So when it says that Hashem sort of took us out of Mitzrayim with an outstretched arm, right? So it means, you look at a hand, the right hand could be a thing of strength, it could be something of giving, whatever the case is. That's what it means, that's what Hashem is doing. He's doing the same type of thing as a hand, right? And in fact, Chassidus takes it a bit deeper. The truth is that that's the real hand, right? Our hand is a weak evolution from Hashem's hand. Right? The truth is, if you talk about the hand is a physical hand. That's the diminished version of a hand, right? Our hand comes from Hashem's hand ultimately. Our eyes comes from Hashem's eyes, but of course it's not physical. But with us, it's physical. Okay. Same thing with speech, right? So we say like this: that our speech, we need to look at what does it mean that Hashem said. So we look at what it means that we speak. So what does it mean when we speak? Number one, it's a process of tzimtzum, as I explained last week. We break it down so it can be relatable to someone else, right? And just generally, the concept of speech is the ability to go beyond ourselves and to share something within ourselves to the outside of ourselves, right? Yeah? Which we do through the process of speech, because we've got to break it down, and it's tzimtzum and so on. So when Hashem spoke at the very beginning of creation, same thing happened. Hashem wanted to create an other, so to speak, in inverted commas, an outside of him, so to speak. It's not really outside of him, but something with the appearance of being outside of him, right? Because the whole point of these two chapters is that there's not really anything outside of him. But he wanted to create something that's considered an outside, right? So therefore he did it through the concept of speech. Didn't speak, right? But it means he went through the same process as speaking, which is the ability to reveal to the outside through the process of speech, breaking it down, 10 utterances, as we explained. But now he says like this, that even when we use that language with Hashem, so we say, yes, Hashem has speech, godly speech, doing the same things as the speech does down here, even then we need to know that it's completely different. And that his speech, although it has the same properties as our speech, so to speak, but it's completely different, it doesn't work the same way. You'll see what he means in a minute. That's what he means in this first right? In other words, not only that it's not like our speech, we say, that's what he means. V'hinei midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheleike midas basar v'dam. The nature of Hashem, the nature of Hashem's things are not like ours, meaning not just that ours is physical and his is not physical. That's not what we mean. We mean deeper than that. We mean that it's completely different. Even the way it works is completely different. We'll see why in a second. Even its definition, the way it works by Hashem is different the way it works by us. Not just the distinction between physical and godly. What do we mean? So it's like this. Sha'adam kashemedaber dibur. When a person speaks, right? Harei hevel hadibur shebefiv. So we speak through a mechanism. There's a concept called hevel hadibur, which means the breath that comes with the speech. Hu murgesh v'nira dovra bifnei atzmai. it can be felt, it can be identified as something else. Muvdil Misharshi becomes separate from its original source. Shehein Bechinas, Shehein Eser Bechinos HaNefesh Atzma, which are the 10 powers of our soul itself. In other words, when we speak, when we enunciate words, right? There's a certain physicality to it, right? The words are something, they're tangible. Breath, whatever the case is. But that speech, that with words that we say, actually become separate, they become distinct from ourselves, from our own intellect or our own emotion. In other words, not just that speaking is the idea to reveal something to you, the way I reveal it actually is through a power that becomes, I give it out of myself. I reveal it out of myself and it becomes something different to me. It becomes separate from me. It's not me anymore. Well, why is that? Because that is actually the definition of speech. The whole idea of speech is to take something within me and to transport it to you. Right? So when I have the potential to speak, okay, the potential to speak is within me, within my soul. When I actually speak, that's exactly what happens. I take something and I reveal it to you. Like, they say, once you open your mouth and you say something, you can't take it back. Right? Why can't you take it back? Because it's not yours anymore. You released it. Right? That's what speech is. Speech is, even physically, it's like that. You enunciate a word, that word comes with a certain breath, it says, hevel, the vapor, the steam, whatever it's called. Right? And you've released it. And that's because that's exactly what speech is. Speech is to release something out of me to you. Right? I still might have the idea in my thought, in my feelings, whatever, but the speech has released something from me to you. So it's become separate from me. Right? Which is part of the reason why it's so distant from me and so insignificant compared to me, or compared to my power of speech, as he explained in the last chapter, right? By the way, that's the difference between dibur and machshava, speech and thought. Thought and speech are both means of expression, right? We say even thought is considered a garment. Thought is not me, it's how I express myself. I express my emotion, express my thing. But the difference is, with thought, it's a garment that is one with me, so to speak, right? It's connected to me at least. One mamash with me, but it's connected to me, right? That's why I can think something, but it remains with me. Speech is the opposite. Speech is that I release something out of me to you. Yeah? Okay, so far? Good. Okay. Here. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ein diburoi muvdel mimenu yisbarach chas v'sholom. The words of Hashem, albeit not physical but spiritual, okay? But nevertheless they speech, it's words, right? Ein diburoi yisbarach chas v'sholom. Ein diburoi muvdel mimenu yisbarach chas v'sholom. His speech is not released outside of him. Ki ein davar chutz mimenu. Because actually there's nothing else besides Hashem. There's no outside of Hashem. Veles asar ponu. Now, by the way, this is going to be not so clear in the beginning, and we'll develop it as we go along. Veles asar ponu minei. There's no space, says the Zohar, that is vacant of Hashem. Right? V'lochen ein dibura yizbarach kedibureinu chas v'sholom. Hashem's speech, even though it's a higher form of speech and a spiritual speech, is not just that it's not physical. It doesn't work the same as ours. For us, it makes sense. Speech is the ability to release something out of me. That's why the speech becomes separate from me. Right? Hashem's speech doesn't work like that. Now we're going to have to understand how that works, because we just said Hashem's speech is also to release something to an other. Right? And yet, it doesn't work the same. Hashem's speech does not become separate from Him. Just like the Novi says, just like there's a pasuk that says, Kashein, Kamoi, Shein machshavtoi kemachshavteinu. Just like Hashem's thought is not like our thought. Kedichsiv, like it's written in Yeshayahu Hanovi. It says, Koloi machshavoisai machshavoisechem, says Hashem, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Uksiv kein govu drochai midarchichem, my ways are higher than your ways. Right? And the same thing is with regard to speech. Hashem's speech is not like our speech, not just because it's not physical. It just doesn't work the same way. Yeah? So why is it called speech? If it doesn't work the same way, why is it called speech? He says, nikra dibura yizbarech b'shem dibur. The only reason that it's called speech, Hashem's speech is called speech, the only reason is rak al derech moshel, because it's like a moshel, k'moy shedibur hatachton, just like human speech. Sheba adam, in the person who megale l'shoymi mashahayot sofun v'nelam b'machshavtoi. Just like our speech is to reveal something that was hidden in our thoughts, right? That's what speech is. You take something that is hidden, and through the mechanism of speech, you reveal it to someone else. Yeah. Kach lemaila, so too, above be'ein soparchu yitzias ha'oir v'hachayes mimenu yizbarach, that revelation of the light of Hashem and the life force that comes from Hashem, mehelem el agilui, from potential to actuality, from being hidden to being revealed, livra oilemus, to actually create the world, ulachayoisem, and to keep them alive, nikraas b'shem dibur, that's called dibur. In other words, dibur is called by Hashem, it's called dibur, it's called speech, because he also revealed something. He revealed the world. The mechanism of his speech was to reveal a world. Previously, before the world, the ability to create the world was hidden, was potential, it wasn't revealed, it wasn't a world. When he created the world, he revealed himself to the world. So therefore it's called Dibur. That part of Dibur is the same. The revelation of something which was hidden and not there to something that is there, that is the same with Hashem's Dibur and our Dibur. Just without Dibur, it's physical, with Dibur it's not physical. Right? And they are the 10 utterances with which the world was created. And also the Torah, Nevi'im, Uksuvim, the Nevi'im and Uksuvim, Shisigu HaNevi'im, that the Nevi'im understood the Marei Nevu'asam in their vision, in their prophetic visions. But that part is true, right? But what is different by Hashem is that by us the speech is separate from us, whereas Hashem's speech remains completely one with him. Now, we have to understand what that means. Okay? What does that mean? Okay, so let's go one more line, and then I'm going to explain something so you understand. He says his speech and his thought are one with him, with absolute oneness. Okay, so like this. Later on, in the second chapter in the second part of Tanya, where he talks about this more, he relates the following idea. There's a certain foundation we have to understand according to Chassidus. Chassidus says that if something comes from something, if B comes from A, right, then previously B must be part of A to begin with. Otherwise, where did it come from? Right? So he says later in Tanya, for example, if we have something called Oir and Moir. So let's take the rays of the sun, right? The sun is the source of light. The sun is not light, actually. In fact, I don't even think in the sun there is light. It's the rays of the sun, what the sun gives out. The sun is the source of light, right? The rays of the sun is what we call Oir. They come out from the sun and they brighten up the world, right? He says, if the rays come from the sun, then they must be the rays must be incorporated within the sun. Does that make sense? Yeah? Now, what does that mean? Because it really doesn't make any sense, because the rays are not in. There's no rays in the sun. That's not what the ray. That's not what the sun is. You know. So what does it mean the rays are incorporated in the sun? What does it mean they're part of the sun itself? The sun is not rays. Rays is what comes out of the sun. But if it comes out of the sun, it must be in the sun. So what does it mean? There's like rays there? If you dig deeper in the sun, you'll find rays of light? No, you won't. So what does it mean? It means that in the sun there's rays, but not as rays come out of the sun. In other words, they don't have a separate identity there. They're there, but just as an expression of the sun, or the ability of the sun to shine, it's not actually a separate entity there.
Potential.
Sorry?
Is it potential?
Yeah, it's kind of more than potential, but it's a very subtle thing to understand this. It's more than potential. It's actually there, but in a different form.
Well, if there wasn't the sun, there wouldn't be any rays.
It's more than that. It's not just that the rays. If the rays gives out sun, that means there's rays within the sun, not just the sun. It incorporates rays, right? I suppose one way to, it doesn't bring this marshal, but maybe one way to understand it a bit is this. You can have something that exists, but actually doesn't exist as a separate entity, right? Although it's there. Right? So I'll give you two things. One I'm just going to make up now. The other one is something that the Rabbi speaks about in a different context. But it'll be easy to understand. So, I suppose one simple marshal you can understand, for example, let's say, if the leaves come from the seed of the tree, right? So there must be leaves in the tree, right? But there's no leaves in the tree. You won't see a leaf there. You understand what I'm saying?
What's the same with the seed? The seed's got the potential for the whole tree.
Yeah, but it's more than potential, I think. It actually has the whole DNA, everything, right? Okay.
Yeah.
In other words, sometimes, what I'm trying to say, sometimes you can see there's something that exists, but not as something separate. I'll give you another marshal that's but it's not exactly accurate. And I'll tell you why it's not accurate in a second. Right? If you're looking for a drop of water, you take a drop of water out of the sea, out of the ocean, right? So now it's called a drop, right? What's it in the sea? Is it there in the sea? Of course it's in the sea, right? So because where you got it from, right? But in the sea, would it be considered a drop of water? No, it's just part of the sea, right? It's part of the ocean. Now, the inaccuracy with that analogy is because, in theory, it is in the sea. Just you can't identify it. But if you could sort of microscopically identify which drop you want, you could go into the sea and say that's the drop I want, right? That's not what we mean. I'll give you a bit of another mashal. How something can be it could be the same thing, but I'll give you two analogies. Chassidus says that emotion. This is a good mashal, actually. I think emotion is a feeling, correct? Where does the feeling come from? Seichel. Right? So we learned at the beginning of the Tanya, particularly nefesh elokis, right? If I think about some things, let's say I think about the need to have a house, or I think about the greatness of, I don't know, going to learn from someone, right? But totally, right now, it's just a completely intellectual idea, right? And then I think about it enough, and I have chokhmah, and I have BINA, and I have das. And then what happens is, suddenly it gives birth to an emotion. Now I'm passionate, I need to go see this person, I need to go. Same with Hashem. We learned about it at the beginning of Tanya, right? You think about the greatness of Hashem, the lowliness of the world, Hashem's only reality, and you sort of decide, it really should be, I should be loving it, right? Like we learned before, there's this intellectual love, we call it, right? Yeah? But really what's supposed to happen, if you're on the level, you're supposed to think about Hashem so much that you give birth to a burning love for Hashem, a passionate, emotional love for Hashem, right? So he's learned that Chochmah and BINA is called father and mother, and Chesed and Gvura, Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, is called the children, correct? Remember that? Yeah? So now, if Avas Hashem, if love of Hashem, the emotion, the feeling of loving Hashem, was born from the seichel, the cognition, intellect, it came from intellect, it must be part of the intellect. Now, if you dissect an idea, you're going to find emotion there, Because emotion is actually the opposite of intellect. Emotion is a feeling. Intellect isn't. It's attached, actually, right? But there's something that Chassidus calls the midas in seichel. In other words, like this. You will find it there. In other words, like this, the mindset that, in my mind, I understand that because it's so great and because I've learned so much and pages and pages and this, that, the other, I need to love him. Right? The way it exists in the mind, it doesn't exist as an emotion because it's part of the mind. It exists as intellect. But so you won't be able to say this is the intellectual part, this is the emotional part. No. In the mind, everything is intellect. But in that intellect, there's a part of the intellect that says, I gotta love him. In other words, so what is it? It's an expression, the midah, the emotion in the mind is an expression of the mind. It's an expression of a complete idea. If it doesn't give birth to emotion, it's not a complete idea. So therefore, the fact that I'm thinking about this so deeply, because I'm thinking about it in a very complete and perfect way, the completeness of the mind means that gives room for love. But the way it's in the mind is just an expression of the mind. It's not a feeling. But it's there. When it's released outside of the mind, it becomes different. It becomes something separate. It becomes an emotion. Is that clear? There's a mashal, the one that I once gave for something else, but it was this, it's a similar idea. It's a mashal like this. So someone that comes to two litigants coming for a base thing. Right? Come before a base thing, right? A says that B owes A $1,000, right? And there's a whole din Torah. And the Dayanim were very learned people, and they know the whole of Shas and Shulchan Aruch, and they're listening to the case, and they're really contemplating in it. And they have to give a ruling at the end, right? They give a ruling. What's the ruling? Halacha is that no, A doesn't owe B. B doesn't owe A $1,000. So only owes $500, right? You know, it's one loss. That's it. Oh, this one's chayav, this one's zakai. It's talking about $50, $100, $5,000, whatever they're talking about right now. In the world of the litigants, right? What is that psak? What is that ruling? To the guy that wins, it's euphoria. He just won $1,000 or saved himself $1,000, whatever the case, right? The one that lost, it's pain. Yeah. Talk about the dollars, the amounts. What does it mean to the litigants? Well, the person who gained $1,000, it means $1,000, that he has more. Right? What does it mean to the other guy? $1,000 he has less. Right? Now the Dayanim, they're talking about the same $1,000 and the same innocent and the same one guy who lost, same win and same loss. It's exactly the same thing. But in their world, it's not something separate. In their world, the win, the loss, the $1,000, the $500, the pain, the happiness, it's all one thing. It's just an expression of the psak. That's all it is. It's the expression of the ruling. You can't decipher it. Because, that part of the psak was very painful. No, not for the Dayanim. I mean, yeah, of course they can be empathetic people, that's a separate thing I'm saying, but in terms of the psak, right? When they write on a piece of paper, A is chayav to pay B, is $100, right? Every word on that piece of paper is exactly the same, including the rationale and the Shulchan Aruch and the sources. It's all one thing. It's all part of the psak. You can't differentiate the win, the loss, the $100, $1,000 from the whole psak. It's not. It's an expression of the psak. When it's released to the litigants, suddenly the $500 means one thing, the win means one thing for one person. They all mean something else. Same thing. The rays from the sun come from the sun. Therefore, they're in the sun. But in the sun, you won't find rays there, right? In the sun, the rays are just an expression of the sun. It's indistinguishable from the sun. And therefore completely insignificant actually as a separate thing. It's just part of the sun. You understand? Okay, so where do we go with this? So he gives a mashal even from a person. Let's see. It's like this. Derech mashal. Right? For example, he says, take speech or thought of a person. But be'oidon be'koyach chochmosei, not speech as is actually spoken, but speech when it was still part of his potential to speak, right? Where does speech come from? Speech comes from ideas. I have an idea, then I speak it, right? So which means my idea must incorporate the speech, correct? V'sichloi, oy b'tshuka v'chemda v'liboy. Or the way the speech was potentially there, in the temptation, in the desire, in the love, in my heart. Remember we had last period, that a person has seichel, a person has intellect, a person has midos. When they first happen, there's no words, right? And it's very hard to distinguish, but even words of thought. Like when I have an instinctive motion, there's no words yet. Only afterwards, I put it into words. First my thought, then in my speech, right? So let's go to the stage before it comes into words. Before it comes into letters, right? By the way, they say that, what is it? How do you know there's no letters, right? If let's say two people, right? They see a delicious chocolate cake, right? And there's something they wanted, right? They're drawn to it, yeah? One person lives in Italy, one person lives in France. You think that the one person is drawn to it in French and the other one's in Italian? No. It's an emotion. There's no words yet. Yeah, if he stays a second, I'm going to get it and I want the cake. Then when he thinks about it, then all of a sudden becomes the words. But the initial instinct doesn't have a language. It's just a feeling. You follow? Okay. However, words come from that feeling. So therefore, the words must be incorporated in that feeling, because everything that comes from something was incorporated in that thing before, right? So let's see. So the letters of speech, the letters of even thought, which came from the love, came from the desire, must be incorporated originally within the emotion. However, but they're indistinguishable from the emotion itself. In other words, the raw emotion that doesn't have letters yet has letters. Because the letters come from that emotion, the letters must be incorporated in the emotion. Just like the rays of the sun. But the letters at that stage are indistinguishable from the sun. The letters at that stage are just one with the sun. You follow? Which is either the idea or the chemna chukabalev, or the desire in the heart. Right? It's only when I start to think about it. In other words, I bring the desire into words. And now the words come from the desire, but now they're something separate. So now they're distinguishable. Now they're words. Yeah? But how those words were in the original thought, the original idea, I should say, or the original desire, those letters are indistinguishable. Those words are indistinguishable from the desire itself, and therefore you can't tell it. You can't tell that they're there. They're there, but they're just an expression of, in other words, every idea, in other words, what are they? They're just a part of the original idea. An idea incorporates many things. The idea also incorporates the possibility to say it out into words. And that it's like the feeling in, as I said, the midah in the seichel. It's just part of the seichel. The seichel incorporates the potential to become to a midah. But at that stage, it's indistinguishable from the idea itself. Same thing with the words. The words are also in the original idea or the original desire. But they're just part of the desire. They're not an expression of the desire. Like the money is an expression of the psak, of the ruling. It's not something different. Only later it becomes something different when it's released. Yeah? Now let me explain what I was about to say. I'll explain it outside. With Hashem, the way it works like this. With Hashem, because He's everywhere, and He's the only reality, really. When Hashem releases the speech, it doesn't become separate. That's the difference. For us, when our speech is in part of our ideas and part of our feelings, so there it's in its source, it's in its origin, like the rays in the sun, so it's indistinguishable. But when I want to actually communicate it to the outside, right? I say it out, then I release it. Once I release it, now it becomes distinguishable and becomes separate from me. With Hashem, and that's why his dibur is different to our dibur, even when he reveals what he's revealing, it never becomes separate from him. It's still part of his reality and still completely one with his reality. Right? And that's the point of this parak. Not only is the dibur, not only is the speech so small and so insignificant, and therefore it's like not even a significant reality, as we said last week, but actually it's more than that. That speech, whatever it is actually still part of Hashem, still one with Hashem completely. Right? Now, the obvious question is, if it's one with Hashem, how come we don't feel like that? How does that work? Like with the sun, it's like saying that the rays are out of the sun, but they're still part of the sun like they were before. But it doesn't work like that. In the Gashmistic world, it doesn't work like that. Either the rays are indistinguishable because they're part of the sun, in which case there's no light, and it's dark, because they haven't been released. Or the rays come out of the sun, and they create light to the world, but then they're not one with the sun as they were before. They're now distinguishable. They're separated from the sun. They're still connected to the sun. They still can't exist without the sun. All very nice, but they're still distinguishable, right? With Hashem, we say something paradoxical. We say that Hashem created the world with dibur, not dibur the way it is in potential like us, but actual dibur, which means he spoke, he revealed the world, he created the world, and yet his dibur remains completely one with him, which by extension will mean that the world is one with him. Right? Because later on in Shaykh al-Mun explains, you can't separate the world from the spark of Hashem either, so because it has no independent existence, right? It's the table is only the spark. The real reality of the table is, it's like the bird, like the stone that goes up. The stone's only up because of the force. The table only existed because the word of Hashem is in it, keeping it alive. And that word of Hashem, although it's very small, but it's one with Hashem. It's still incorporated with Hashem. It's one with Hashem like the rays in the sun, like the speech in our intellect, in our feeling, an indistinguishable bond. So of course, that's what it is. The question is, obviously that's a question. The problem with that is, hold on a second, then we shouldn't be distinguishable. It should be obvious that we're just part of Hashem's reality, which it isn't obviously to us. Right? So okay, then that's the next part of the prayer, we'll do that next week. But first it's just establishing the reality. That the bond of Hashem's dibur with him is different. Hashem created the world with dibur. Whatever dibur means by us, it means by him. He revealed, he communicated, he created another, he revealed his what was hidden before. That's all true. What's different, however, is that without dibur, once we do that, our speech becomes distinguishable, becomes separate. We released it out of ourselves. It's no longer one with us. It's no longer like the dollar on the psak. It's actually the dollar in the litigants world, right? That's how it works in our speech. But Hashem's speech doesn't work like that. Hashem's speech, even after he releases it, it still remains completely inseparable from him, just like our speech within the potential of our ideas. That's the inside. It says, V'kocha mamash, exactly this way it works, Derech Mashal. Miyuchada is diburoi umachshavtoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem's dibur is one, and his thought is one. B'tachlis hayichud, with an absolute bond, b'mehusei v'atzmusei is baruch, with him himself. His speech and him are not separable, are not distinguishable. Which means, gam achar sheyotza dibura yizbarach al hapol, even after his speech was released into the outside, into an existence, and the creation of the world, but nevertheless, it remains one with him, just like it was one with him before the world was created. Right? Before the world was created, what was Hashem's dibur? It was like the ray in the sun, indistinguishable, just an expression of him. It's part of him, is that part of his perfection is that he can create a world. Part of his perfection that he can speak. But it wasn't actually a distinguishable thing. It says Tanya with Hashem, even after he created the world, it's the same thing. His dibur, his speech is completely one with him. Ein shum shinoi klal lefonav yisbarech, and there's no change whatsoever to him, because it is one thing with him as it was before. So why is he telling us this? He's telling us this to explain to us that in a deeper way, the concept of Achdus Hashem, the oneness of Hashem, that really is the only reality. Last week, we said that there's Dibur, and that Dibur, it cannot be considered independent existence because it's nothing compared to the thought, compared to the midas, compared to the seichel, and so on and so forth, right? Now we're taking it more than that. It's not just that there's no significance to it. It's an indistinguishable thing. We are one with Hashem. In other words, the dibur is creating the world, not just a dibur that's a power on its own, but insignificant compared, kula kamei, like an ant that walks into the room. At the end of the day, the ant that walks into the room is still an ant. It doesn't change anything for me, because it's so insignificant. So it's like nothing, but it's still there. Now we're taking it deeper. The speech that Hashem created the world with is actually not even an ant. In other words, it's actually part of him. Like the rays are part of the sun, like the midas are part of seichel, like the dollar is part of the psak, and there's nothing else besides the psak, and nothing else besides the seichel at that point. The dibur that Hashem has dibur, he has speech, and he uses speech to create a world, but the dibur remains one with him, indistinguishable from him. Part of his infinite existence, part of his essence. Now again, it doesn't mean the world doesn't exist. The world exists. Right? That's why there's Torah mitzvahs. That's why Hashem created a world. The world has an existence. But its existence is an expression of his existence. The world comes from the Dibur, and the Dibur is just an expression of him. Yeah? They tell a story about the Alter Rebbe. Once he spoke a lot of Chassidus, and he for the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, the third Rebbe, and he said a lot of Chassidus to him until the Tzemach Tzedek understood this idea so much that he didn't, not like us, we learn it, we understand it, but he lived it and experienced it, and he came to the conclusion there's no world, right? Which it is a world. So the Alter Rebbe had to say many mamorim for him to convince him, no, there is a world. Right? We should have such problems, right? Yeah. So there's a question which we're going to leave with because we're going to say that we're going to talk about it next week. But I'll just say a very interesting thing. The question we have to understand, which he alludes to briefly here, which he elaborates more in the second part of Tanya. So why don't we feel that way? Why don't we just feel ourselves part of Hashem's reality? How come, if in fact we are the rays within the sun, that we don't really have a separate entity? We don't have a separate identity. So how do we know? How can we feel separate? How can we feel yeshus? How can we feel prominence, significance? Right? I don't mean real significance. I mean we should feel significant. We do a Torah mitzvah. We connect to Hashem. We should feel important. But I'm talking about the how can we feel like a separate entity? We don't, you know? Before I tell you this, I'll tell you another story. There's a story once with one of the, I think with the Rebbe, but someone said it also. Or one of the other Rebbes, I don't remember who it was. that someone came to him and says, Ruvain owes me money. I lent him money, he owes me money, right? So, so he was called, and the Rebbe asked him, "You owe him money?" He goes, yeah. He said, "Why don't you pay?" He says, "No, we learn the whole world is nothing. The whole world is nothing. We loan the money, it's all nothing." So I said, "Okay, let's take this nothing, put him on a nothing, and give him a few nothings, and we'll see how fast he'll pay the money, right?" Okay, we live in a world, we feel the world, right? That's how we feel the world. Why? If in truth we are like the speech as it's still incorporated inseparable from the source, we are like the rays within the sun, so how come I don't feel that way? If that's the reality. Okay, so we'll learn that next week, right? But I'll tell you an interesting thing. It's a good question to have. In Shara Yichud B'Munah, if you ever actually, anyway, so in Shara Yichud B'Munah also he says this idea we part of like the sun, the world is like the sun the ray in the sun. And he says, if that's the case, in Perek Gimel, in the third Perek of the second part of Tanya, he says, if that's the case, how come we don't become completely bottled? How come we just don't disintegrate into Hashem's existence? How come we don't just feel ourselves like we don't exist, right? Because why don't we just become bottled to our source? And he ends off the Perek and he says, to understand this, we have to give an introduction. And he finishes the chapter, the middle sentence. Finished. And then Perek Daled, he starts to explain the whole thing, and part of that we'll learn next week, right? So they say a word like this. They say that, why did Alter Rebbe do this? Why does he finish a chapter with a question? Right? Why doesn't he start the chapter with a question? Finish a little bit earlier, start the question, and then do the question answer. Why does he finish the answer with the question? So they say like this, because there's a well-known thing that those authors of, not Chassidus, but those authors of Chakira, like the Rambam and others, right? There was a style when they wrote Chakira, when they wrote about philosophical questions of faith, questions of Emunah and so on, that they never ask the question before the answer. What they do is they first give the answer, and they first give the explanation, and they say, this explanation answers the following question, right? Why? Because they didn't want someone, pick up a sefer, you learn a question of faith, a philosophical question that could challenge someone's Emunah, right? Yeah? They say, okay, now I'm tired now. The shir is over. We'll continue next time. They'll go to sleep. They'll sleep a whole night with a question on Hashem, a question on Emunah, right? So they never do that. So they always make sure that the explanation comes first. Here, on the other hand, Alter Rebbe finishes the chapter of the question, which makes it very probable that's the end of the shir, right? You finish the shir and you go. So the Chassidim always say that with this question, it's good to sleep with. It's good to go to sleep having the question, so why aren't we bottled? Why are we so arrogant? Why are we so egocentric? Why do we feel ourselves separate? That's a good question to go to sleep with. There's an answer, but go sleep on it in the meantime. It's a good question to ask yourself. Why are we not bottled? Why don't we have bittul? Anyway, so we're also going to do that. We're going to end with the question, and we'll do it next week. And to have the question for a week, why we're not bottled is fine.
Thank you.
All right.